Are we recording? Yes, we are. All right, I'm going to call this workshop to order. This is the CARES Evaluation Series, Community and Vendor Engagement. And before I do some opening remarks, I think I'll go around and we'll do introductions here. And I know that our speakers, our presenters are going to be doing the presentations virtually, and so we will get to you as we are going through this process. So, Nicole, we'll start with you.
Commissioner Nicole Fretham, District 1.
Mary Jo McGuire, Commissioner, District 2. Tony Carter, Commissioner, District 4.
Brian O'Connor, County Manager.
Trista Maniscalco, District 3.
McDonough, District 6.
Victoria Reinhardt, District 7.
Rafael Ortega, District 5.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to jump right into this. This workshop is the capstone of all the previous 5 CARES evaluation sessions. I mean, this was a big deal, obviously, for our county and for our country, and so, and the process that we had has been emulated by many. But it integrates the learnings from all the 5 the projects from May to July of 2021. This topic, as I said at the beginning, is about vendor and community engagement, and it highlights how the voice of community was integral to our CARES investment areas, how the community shaped recommendations, programs, and services that impacted them, what we learned from our engagement with community, and what we can do to improve community engagement post-pandemic, although I don't know that we're actually post-pandemic yet. But the fact is, we learn as we go. The previous CARES, it was in our documentation.
Was
I
it?
printed it.
Where?
I don't have it in my
It's not on the legislate, right? It's not on iLegislate?
I thought it was.
No, I don't have it on iLegislate.
I'll get some.
Oh, dear.
I don't have it on iLegislate either.
Okay.
Where did
No,
you-
maybe because
Oh, because it was sent to us.
it out. Maybe.
Well,
I printed it.
where'd you print it out from?
I don't know, Beverly printed it.
Yeah, okay.
honestly, So,
Let it be part of the record that Victoria was treated special.
Well, so was the chair.
Was that the first time?
Oh, good one. All right. Hey, he wants to, take me under his wing,
Sorry,
so.
we've lost control.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, we're looking for the
You know what? We have fun here, right? Okay, I will continue with my opening remarks, and we'll make sure that everybody gets a copy of the actual presentation, so that you can keep that information. Okay, so the previous CARES evaluation series included homeless and emergency assistance, the food and basic needs and research, small business, enterprise services, and workforce development. Okay, do you want to wait for Ryan to get back with the copies, or can we just go ahead? All right. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to turn it over to Elizabeth Holzman. And Elizabeth, as we go through the speakers, I would appreciate it if you would hand it off to whoever is next, unless you want to do introductions at this point and then hand it off after that. Which would you prefer?
Thank you, Chair Reinhardt. I can do the introductions on behalf of the panelists, if that's okay. And then I'll hand it off to Dan the Master, who will kick off the presentation. But I just wanted to thank Chair Reinhardt, commissioners. I'm very honored to kick off the last of the CARES evaluation series, which have been kicked off by our previous deputy county managers. I will keep my remarks brief, but a couple of things I wanted to highlight for you in this presentation. As Chair Reinhardt mentioned, this is really the capstone and the catch-all of all previous series you guys have heard since May in the last few weeks. 2 things to call out. One is to remind you of our strategic priority around advancing racial and health equity and shared community power. We have made a commitment as an organization to strengthen our countywide approach to leveraging programs, processes, and policies, and to prioritize innovations in governance, including advancing race and health equity. And that means tackling historical and longstanding race-based disproportionate outcomes. We also committed to deconstructing systematic and organizational barriers to be more fair and inclusive and transparent in how we share power with residents and communities. And this presentation will kind of give you some themes and learnings that we've had in the past year in response to that. The other thing I want to really highlight in this is really the value and the impact of evaluation and the team and the leadership in the past 18 months. Many of you know, but evaluation has traditionally been housed within programs and departments to provide ongoing information. And while that's valuable and impactful itself, we really feel like this past 18 months have showed the value of evaluation and how their services have focused on larger strategic priorities and service changes that impact multiple departments and whole service teams. So this more systematic use of evaluation and working across departments and service teams has been really valuable to our organization. And these last few series has been a great model of that. With that, I do want to introduce the panelists and the presenters. They are very near and dear to my heart because these folks before you have really put in many countless hours back in the days when we were working 7 days a week across 2 to 3 shifts. These folks served as planning chiefs. They served in the IMT. They supported the IMT. The evaluation team lended their staff and their consultants to us in this past year. And so I'm just really pleased that they are here today and they deserve the recognition of being your final panelist for the day. So first we have Sarah Hawley, our current public health director. I believe she's filling in for Prince Corbett, our racial and health equity administrator, and she will be representing the research team today. We have Katrina Mosser, who's joining us from Seattle, Washington on her vacation. It's her day to be here and present on behalf of the Food and Basic Needs team, and I commend her leadership as well. And last but not least, we have Max Holtison. As many of you guys know, have worked probably long and hard in our homeless work during the pandemic, is now our planning manager in CED, but truly lives and breathes this work as well. And it's his birthday this week, by the way. I should mention. And so with that, we're going to do a panel style presentation and it'll be moderated by Dana DeMaster. And I should mention Dana DeMaster, our evaluation team. And truly, without her and her leadership, her team and her supervision of our consultants this process and her value to the compliance team in this process has been invaluable. And I hope if that's one thing you leave away with, that's what I hope you leave from. And with that, I'll hand it over to Dana. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, Madam Chair and Commissioners. As Elizabeth said, this is a capstone workshop and it's looking at data from all the programs that we evaluated under the CARES umbrella. And we really saw this as a rare opportunity to look at data across programs and systems and service teams and departments in a way that we don't normally get to do. And so really draw that richness of experience and richness of information when looking at different programs that did different things, but had common themes and findings throughout. And so back when Ryan requested that we evaluate these projects, he had 2 overall questions that he wanted answered. Are Ramsey County residents better off as a result of the CARES programming? And did the projects achieve the outcomes the community was seeking? We also saw, once we got into it a little bit, that many of these evaluations were gathering rich data from community organizations and vendors, and saw, as you've seen in the other presentations, those voices and what we've learned about how to be a better partner to community in that business relationship as well. And so we've added that 3rd question. Regarding the first question of are residents better off, I think the previous workshops have kind of given us a resounding yes, that overall, these projects, without them, things would have been quite different, and that really Ramsey County residents were overall better off because of CARES programming. And so I won't go any further really into that. So this workshop will focus on the questions about achieving community outcomes and summarize the overall themes for vendor engagement. So the question of whether we achieve the community outcomes, the outcomes the community was seeking, is not an easy one to answer. Who is community? Is it residents, vendors, people accessing services, all of the above? Are they people who have the time and resources to attend meetings? Who are we engaging and who are we not? And so under the broad umbrella of community, it's really difficult to say, did we achieve what the community was looking for? And so we really focused on the people who were able to attend things and able to interact with us, keeping mindful of those voices and those people who couldn't. In this work, we were realizing too that, you know, although community engagement and shared leadership has been a strategic priority for some time, during an emergency response to a disaster like the pandemic, all systems were stressed, including existing community groups and community and people in the residents. And so their ability to engage or having the energy to engage and our ability to engage them, while a high priority and with great urgency, was also stressed. And at the time that we first were doing all these community engagement and designing these programs, you know, we would think about that time and how everything was happening so fast and everyone was working long hours and there's a lot of uncertainty. And so the focus was on providing a response and quickly getting those dollars out to the people who needed them. Everyone was lacking information about whether the virus or what community needed or what they wanted. And so some of those things were difficult to articulate. So rather than asking Ryan's question of did we achieve community outcomes, we framed this as what were the community priorities regarding CARES funding and how did we know? In what ways? Yeah.
Dana,
Yes.
could you hold on for just a moment, because I'm not sure if we're supposed to have the presentation up on the screen at all? I mean, it's because if people are watching this and we're looking at a presentation and they can't see it, was this supposed to be?
So Madam Chair, on the public website, the presentation is available. So anyone who wants to see it could go access it, because that's how we just make copies of it. So it is available to anyone from the public who could follow along as you're watching this with Dana.
Okay.
And you could pull it up if you want.
Yes,
I'm not sure, I just wasn't sure if you thought it was being broadcast or exactly where we're at here, so.
yeah, I've checked in with a few folks. People cannot see the PowerPoint right now. Dana, were you planning on sharing your screen too?
I can.
I think that'd be great.
Okay, I will share my screen. Okay. Okay, let me get, oh, can people see it now?
No.
No.
There you go.
Okay, there we go.
There we go, okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah. Okay, let me get myself sorted out here so I can at least see some of you in the room. There we go. Okay,
And then Dana, do you want to go to full slide presentation?
I can try.
Presenter mode?
See all the trouble you started.
Okay, is that better?
I don't think it's,
Still the same.
Oh, okay.
Okay, maybe, never mind. It looks like it might.
Oh.
There we go.
Do we have it now?
Yeah. Well, it's not in, you know what, at least people can see it. It's not in presenter mode.
You can put it in presenter mode by going down to that little,
Right there.
yeah, or up or down. There's one down below and there's one up above.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I'll go from here.
Okay,
Yeah,
it's okay.
let me just see if I can.
Presenter mode, that isn't presenter.
Okay. I think I got it. Okay. So our questions that we asked instead were what were community priorities regarding CARES funding and how did we know? In what ways did community priorities shape our programming and services? And what were the barriers to implementing community priorities? And what can we learn to improve community engagement? So to answer these questions, we reviewed the recordings and transcripts from 5 of the town halls, reviewed documents and reports on community engagement, other things done during the pandemic, also prior to the pandemic, and interviewed 6 of the project leads about their experience with community engagement. I've asked Max Holthusen, Katrina Mosser, and Sarah Hawley to join me in a panel discussion of the community engagement work they did while planning and implementing the projects they worked on. This isn't meant to be an exhaustive look at community engagement. We'd have a huge panel if we had everybody who did a community engagement and was involved in some way. And so I invited these three people because their work is very representative, but also unique in many ways. And there's different nuances and things that they did or that happened in their projects that didn't necessarily happen across all. And so to give a broad idea of the various ways they sought community input and how they knew what the community's priorities are. There'll be two panel discussions. The first one will focus on the types of engagement they did and how they learned what community priorities were. And with that, I will turn it over to the panel to talk about what kind of community engagement they did and what they learned.
We split our kind of work into three big buckets. These are broad buckets and all of our work kind of intertwined within these, but the three buckets are utilizing existing networks to prioritize CARES funding, new services and new engagement networks, and then kind of a holistic community-wide engagement. I'm going to be focusing on the utilizing existing networks. In the housing and homelessness world, as many of you know, there's a vast network of folks already involved in this work. And in so a lot of ways, as we were implementing CARES and thinking about what gaps in the system do we need to fund to respond to this crisis, we went to those existing networks rather than establishing new networks. A couple examples of these are obviously Heading Home Ramsey is an example there. And then it kind of breaks off from there, either by grant or program. So whether that's all of the providers who do family homelessness prevention and assistance program, the ESG, housing support providers, housing stabilization services providers. So all of these groups of kind of vendors and providers and community networks associated with them already had these groups. And so we kind of just transitioned the goal of those groups to focus on the crisis. Furthermore, a lot of this work is organized by the target population. And so whether that's unsheltered residents, our shelter providers, youth, families, or kind of single adults otherwise. So all of those kind of groups already existed. And so how do we utilize those and transition to kind of focus on the crisis? There was also kind of a bucket of kind of governmental work groups. And so many of the commissioners have been involved in these as well, whether they have been hosted by the state, primarily DHS and Minnesota Housing, or the city and our partnership with the city of St. Paul, mostly focused on unsheltered homelessness and shelter expansion there. And there was some caveats of where we felt like we needed to add more, and I would include the policy action group, the PAG, in this, where to continue to make sure the commissioners and school district leaders and some of our other city leaders were continue to come up with this work. And then we felt like the youth area was kind of under-resourced in terms of staff capacity, so we focused more of our energy on those youth providers as the work progressed throughout the summer of 2020. Another area where everything I just mentioned was mostly providers and vendors. And so another area that was lacking was direct resident contact. And so as the summer progressed and from the recommendations of our PAG, we started focusing also on residents, whether that's a direct neighborhood or an existing group, again, like Freedom for the Streets. So you can see that all of our work really centered on existing networks of vendors, community advocates, and residents.
Thank you, Max. Katrina, do you want to talk about food and basic needs and new services, new engagement networks?
Thank you, Dana. So yeah, for the food work, we, while there was previous work before the pandemic by Ramsey County in the food world, we were not a direct provider. We were not directly providing services in this area. So it was more an example of new services and a new funding structure that we were trying to build and figure out how we meet the community's needs. So while the county did provide support for families and support for residents through things like SNAP or SHIP grants or support for farmers markets, we were not more broadly a funder historically or a provider of food. So we needed to tap into some of our existing networks, but also build new networks and figure out how we could really get to and understand the community's needs when it came to food in particular during the pandemic. So that meant, reaching out to some of those existing partners like food shelves, partners that provide youth meals during the summer for in place of schools, also working with the schools, public health partners like in the community engagement area in public health that worked on SHIP grants, and also community members and trusted partners that we had in the community that may or may not be experts in food, but are trusted and are close to different communities within our county that we could go to understand what families' needs might be, and to really build that dialogue and have multiple different ways to engage. Similar to the food work, we also to the housing work, we also had the policy action group that was formed with Commissioner Ortega and Commissioner Manis-Castillo, and also Commissioner McGuire, working on that committee quite a lot to help us in that work. And we did multiple dialogues with community that had over 100 people attending on multiple occasions, a number of surveys that were developed, which had over, I think, nearly 2,000 responses on the first one. Sarah Hawley was instrumental in creating a lot of that work and engagement, and really understood what the needs were of our community. So it was building it from scratch, and really an example of where we were able to work with community to develop our response and develop our proposal. And then throughout the time of implementing what we heard from community, going back to community to check in to see whether we were meeting the needs and how we could adapt and learn as we go. And we found that was really essential in community feeling heard and responded to. And then as we were winding down for CARES funding, not winding down for the pandemic, but winding down for CARES funding, able to go back to the community and talk about what we did and what is still needed. So there was an ongoing dialogue about what should our response be, and then as we go, are we doing it right? What more do we need to do? And then as we were winding down, this is what we did. What are some gaps? What are some future things that we need to keep on looking at when we think about food security in the county? So it was fortunately a really great example of how we were able to work with community to respond in a really tough situation. So I'll hand it back to Dana or Sarah for the next.
Well, Sarah, would you like to take it away and talk about research and the holistic community-wide engagement?
Of course. Thank you, Dana. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Commissioners, County Manager. So I'll take the holistic community-wide engagement approach. And, research really took a holistic, I think, county-wide approach to engagement during really throughout our COVID-19 response. As you know, we were set up outside of IMT to work directly with our county manager and community to lift up and identify community priorities. And so we did this in a variety of ways, while also keeping in mind our advancing racial and health equity and shared community power priority area. And so I want to mention just a few things that occurred. First and foremost, research focus areas to begin with, and I'll just lift up a few of them, were really around communications and messaging. And in that space, I don't know if you remember way back in May of 2020, but we hosted and sponsored a number of community-led or community-driven town halls. And so we did that, I think, starting with health and wellness, and we built that out so strategically, and I think in a way that spread over into our housing area and just other facets of our work. And so that was really an opportunity for us to center community voice, listen to community, and respond to questions, particularly in recommendations that were focused on our efforts to improve our countywide response during COVID-19. And in that, we hosted, I want to say, over 20 virtual town halls and community engagement sessions. And we had hundreds of actually thousands of attendees. We were able to even leverage, Facebook Live and other areas of focus and social media platforms. And many of you probably attended those monthly community conversations with Dr. Ogawa. And so we did that. That was one type of, I think, really key engagement that research was facilitating, but also partnering across our entire enterprise to support during our response. Of course, I can't not mention the work that we did with the Equity Action Circle, and that really leaned into research's fourth priority area around community engagement and outreach. And so we were, the EAC was launched in April or May of 2020, and we have 15 phenomenal community members, residents that we were working with strategically to co-create and identify key priority areas during our COVID-19 response. And of course, from that came a list of recommendations and priorities that EAC identified in partnership with our county manager and research. And so I want to mention that. Another holistic approach that we took to our countywide engagement, which we talked about at the last board workshop with research, was of course our research partnerships, right? The funding mechanism that we had, leveraging our CARES funding during that time. And so we did a number of things with the $1.5 million that was a direct allocation from the CARES funding to work directly with community through our Trusted Messenger initiative, through our Connector initiative, through those community conversations that Commissioner Ortega lifted up last year around really wanting to hear from community and what community needed during our COVID-19 response. And so, research really identified community partners to help us identify who our partners should be during that time. And so we really took a holistic approach to working directly with community to say, what should we focus on? We built off the work, as Director Mosser mentioned, of food and basic needs to identify the Trusted Messenger initiative. And then, we continue to convene community throughout that process as we were putting out those supplemental resources to community to, impact the Trusted Messenger initiative and the Connector initiative and our media messaging initiative. And so during that process, our lead evaluator, Ms. Sarah Mayat, and Kasong Yang, one of our research team members, led those reflection sessions with community that Dana lifted up earlier, where we were really trying to pivot as needed and as requested by community to improve the initiatives that we were launching in response to COVID-19. And so I would say those three areas of focus were really the cornerstone of the work and the types of engagement that we did, where we were trying to really take that holistic countywide engagement approach during our response.
Thank you, Sarah. Through all of this engagement that was done, there was 3 overarching themes that we heard from everything when we reviewed the transcripts and all the reports. And so whether it was from workforce town hall or a small business town hall or homelessness, wherever it was from, there was 3 broad ideas. And so first is, and we talked about this in the very first workforce workshop, that a holistic approach to community need. And that, so rather than viewing need through the lens of a particular program like workforce or food, community really wanted the county to be able to view a person or a family holistically and ensure that programming shared information and addressed all the support needs of that family. That came up again and again. The second was ensuring that information was shared through community channels that people trust in multiple languages and through a variety of means. And finally, building on and supporting existing community organization and services. So the importance of amplifying and growing small organizations and organizations that already have relationships with people needing services. People talked about the need for capacity development and sustaining their own organizations through that time. In addition to the work that Max, Katrina, and Sarah mentioned, there was also projects, I'm distracted by the various PowerPoints I currently have open. There were also there's also project-specific recommendations and other ways that community engagement were done. For example, with small business, a lot of businesses just reached out directly and called. And so there was a lot of one-on-one engagement with people seeking services or needing help. And that happened in other places too, where those existing relationships or people knowing to call, contacting their commissioner, emailing Ask Ramsey County was another way that community was engaged and opened that door for a deeper conversation. Also knowing what community or having those relationships prior to the pandemic. And so work that was done prior to the pandemic and knowing what community wanted, some of those things don't change. And I think specifically about workforce development and how the work that they had been doing around engaging community around workforce needs, they said that the need hadn't changed. It had just become more urgent and perhaps more deeper in certain communities. And so being aware of those things and having those relationships and gathering the information already was a really good place for them to start. So those were some of the things we learned about community priorities and how we knew. So in what ways did community priorities shape our programming or services? And what were the barriers to incorporating those priorities? The three things that came out around the big priorities, so communication, holistic need, and capacity building. The ways that these showed up in the projects were the use of emergency purchasing informal quotes that didn't have a defined scope, they had a defined outcome. So this provided space for organizations to tailor the response to their community and really build on their capacity by doing what they were already doing well, rather than chasing particular funds or grants, especially in a time when they themselves are facing financial pressures and uncertainty due to the pandemic. The creation of the trusted messenger and media messaging projects, which really helped us get information out in a variety of means and in a variety of ways to different communities. The holistic approach is more difficult to define and it's more difficult to realize. And so while there were ways that this did show up, redoing the website around COVID, creating the food access website, handing out flyers, about other services, when someone got a service like a home food delivery, they also got information about food shelves and about other county services. But I'm going to invite my panel back to talk about the ways that their projects incorporated the feedback they got and what ways it changed what they did, and also any barriers they had to implementing it. And so I will turn it back over to Max.
I think in the housing and homelessness world, it was really about, we heard a lot of needs across different population areas, and then how do you balance all of those needs as well as trying to tackle the crisis. So I think as we really focused on the unsheltered and the shelters, especially around isolation and quarantine, and then building out additional spaces for to depopulate shelter and then to bring people off the streets, that then left youth and family providers feeling like they weren't part of the puzzle then. And so then community was really focused on those populations as we got one other population under control. And so how do you balance all those competing needs with limited kind of capacity internally to do all of that? And so I think that was one of the major barriers to kind of implementing everything we heard from community on the housing and homelessness side.
All right, thanks, Max. I can pick up. So for the food side, the first bullet on the slide about having EPIQs that did not have a defined scope was really essential in the food work because we wanted to create funding opportunities for community to tell us what the needs were and then be able to meet it, whether it meant prepared meals that were specifically culturally appropriate for elders, for instance, in the Southeast Asian community, which there was a gap to that point, or felt like there was a gap in services to that point, for us to tell them how to fill that gap. How can we work with them to fill that gap? To food shelves that may need help just getting packaging for, delivering their food in a different way than they used to. And what does that mean to them? How much do they need? How do we fund it? So really having that flexibility, and we were able to do that. And it was a really good lesson learned, I think, for the future of how we can structure requests. One of the barriers we did run into was working with people that maybe weren't used to contracting with the county and providing some technical support, providing assistance not only in submitting the proposals and how we can do that equitably and without any sort of conflict of interest, and then also helping to get payments and structuring that in a way that meets the needs of those community providers that may not have a lot of capital to draw on and wait for a payment. So really providing that assistance for new providers and people that are new to working with the county and throughout their period of time of working with us was really crucial. For the holistic approach, we heard that a lot. We wanted to be able to address the food needs of a whole household versus needing to go to the schools, needing to go to food shelf and multiple different locations. And while we heard that loud and clear, that was definitely a barrier in terms of funding streams of how to overcome that. And I think that's essential and will be a big piece of Carissa Glatt's work, I'm sure working with Director Hawley and Deputy County Manager Hadeen as we look to the future of food security in Ramsey County.
Thank you, Katrina.
I would like to note for those that are watching this and the transcription that's up there, it doesn't always transcribe correctly.
Yeah,
We love our new providers. We don't think they're creepy. So just know that a transcription is a hard thing to do.
Paul needs to see it.
Okay, who's next?
All right, I'm next. Thank you, Commissioner or Madam Chair. So I'll ditto what Katrina or Director Monster said around those challenges, right? Especially as new contractors came on board. I want to take this a couple directions though. So in what ways did community priorities shape programming and services? I want to start with the EAC really quickly. And I know we have inundated you with information around the EAC and the great work happening there. But I would say that work just demonstrates the challenge around systems change, right? And so those priorities, those 5 priority areas that were identified by EAC are truly, we're in the space right now in real time, looking to do that systems change work. And so I just want to lift that up, that we continue to pivot, work directly with the sponsors that are sponsoring the key priority areas that are Equity Action Circle lifted up back in August of 2020. But we're also just noting that it takes time, right? Systems change takes time, building relationships and making sure that this work doesn't become transactional. I'll pivot over to our research partners and just say that, you know, on both sides, time was not on our side, right? So we were moving very quickly to launch a lot of this work in partnership with community. But I will say that throughout the time, and I mentioned this before, you know, research really chose funding opportunity focus areas based on community informed recommendations. And that really was born out of the food and basic needs area. Like I mentioned earlier, we convened a community review panel for the selection of our phase 1 research partners. And then we continue to work with community to gather informed feedback on the selection of our phase 2 research partners. And so I would say that's one way that really helped shape the direction and how we pivoted really in real time with the focus areas of research and the funding we put out in that direction. But again, time and funding limitations were definitely some of our barriers to incorporating some of our community-centered priorities. So I just want to mention that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, and all the other panelists. So as you heard from the panelists, and we found also across the other projects that aren't here today, there were 3 kind of really broad areas where, although we heard community loud and clear, we weren't necessarily able to do that. And some of the ways that we are able to try our hardest. And so in terms of barriers, some of the biggest were state and federal rules. And so for instance, as Katrina had alluded to with food and basic needs, the whole family holistic approach to feeding a family, the school USDA rules only allowed schools to feed children. And so we could either double up and feed children in some areas and duplicate what was happening at the schools, or kind of continued in this siloed approach and work with schools. For workforce and their town hall, there's a lot of discussion about scholarships and the need for retraining and taking a pause while someone was out of work to retrain. But universities and colleges received CARES funding that included money for scholarships that didn't allow the kind of that double dipping to occur. And the same thing with talking about continual feedback loops and that importance of having that ongoing relationship with community groups for emergency assistance as they moved into the landlord work, that input was invaluable in terms of understanding how the landlord program should be shaped. But then people really questioned, why don't landlords have the same verification requirements as tenants? And that's because the tenant stuff is the tenant requirements are in state statute. And so there were statutes that we had to work around. As I think all three of the panelists mentioned staff capacity and the need to balance the competing needs and the many needs in the community with our ability and staff time to do that. But temps were hired, people were pulled in, obviously redeployed all over the place into these projects. But that also was a staff capacity issue because they had to, their regular work wasn't necessarily getting done, or they were retraining into a new area. And finally, the need to move quickly and spending deadlines. And so there were trade-offs that had to be made kind of along the way where we only had so much time to get the money out the door and do that work. So what did we learn? That we can improve our community engagement ongoing. And I guess I won't say post-pandemic anymore, but when this was written back in March, maybe we were more hopeful. The importance of existing relationships in a crisis. And so having those trusted relationships that you could rely on, not only was a good way to, get information and to provide information, but also it cascaded out to new networks. And so those existing groups or existing people invited the people that they knew, who then invited the people that they knew. And we see this a lot in the work of food and in research. Without those relationships, though, urgency is really helpful, and having a shared goal and a shared thing that we're working on. And so in areas where there weren't as many strong existing relationships, that urgency brought new groups together and opened doors that we hadn't previously had. The importance of authentic relationships that are not transactional. And so I heard all the panelists mention the importance of feedback loops, and this is what we did. How is it going? What are some of the ongoing gaps? What do we need to be doing now? And having that honesty and transparency. The co-creation of policies and programs, and really having community there from the beginning. And what should our goals be? What kind of services should we be providing? What is the role of the county? What is the role of community? And having those discussions early on. The centralized support for community engagement that research provided, the Raised Health Equity administrators continue to provide, was seen as critical. And so having that support for people who were not necessarily skilled or had a lot of expertise in this area, but then also not tapping the same community members multiple times from multiple places within the county who weren't talking to each other. And so that importance of having that centralized support to do it well and to really engage in consistent ways across different groups. And finally, the importance of having leaders and decision makers at the table, that leaders need to be visible. We heard again from people who attended the presentations or worked with us from the community. They felt valued and listened to when leadership was at the table. But it also, on the other hand, sped up the ability to implement change or implement suggestions because of a more direct communication with the people who are actually going to make the decision about whether something would happen. So,
Say, Dana, I don't mean to interrupt, but if we can move a little bit more, we want to have time for discussion with our commissioners. So can we move just a little bit more quickly, maybe get towards the vendor engagement and maybe
that actually is just leading into vendor engagement right now.
Great.
Okay. So with vendor engagement, as these data draw from all the projects, some of the things may have been mentioned in previous workshops. And so, but I want to stress that the importance of this is that they came from every project we talked to. And so they may have been said before, but there's other things that are from across all of them that are a bit different. And also I want to note that many of the things we learned when we talk about vendors, we often think about procurement. But many of these things have less to do with procurement and more to do with that relationship development on the program end, that long before a solicitation happens, and the contract management end on the back end after the contract is in place, and that ongoing relationship even after the contract ends. So we did 16 reflection sessions across several of the programs, reflection sessions with county staff involved, and we interviewed the 12 small business partnering outreach organizations. So how can we improve our contracting procurement processes to support new and small vendors, and particularly those in Black, American Indian, Latino, Asian communities and women? Vendors want more information about the solicitation process, and this has come up in other workshops, but having videos, education events, checklists of required documents, and pre-program launch meetings would be very helpful. There's great value in being involved early and helping, like we said, in the community engagement portion to shape the solicitations and determine the goals. There was a real desire to network and connect together, and the county's role as a convener. Workforce in particular used a cohort model where they brought on several vendors at once and were able to help them develop relationships with each other as well as the county to do their work better. And then exploring ways to provide advanced payments so that new or small organizations could have working capital. What kinds of support and technical assistance are needed to help vendors be successful? And throughout this, we got lots of positive feedback on the help and guidance that organizations received. But really, many of them were looking for a single point of contact for any question. And so rather than having someone to go to with program questions, with invoicing or payment questions, and having a contract manager, really having that single point of contact who could get them whatever they needed was seen as a critical to success. The invoicing process is a common challenge. How to submit, how to itemize, how to bill correctly, understanding expectations. That was very important to people. And then there was a lot of questioning about how required reporting would be used and how it was relevant. And so those were the things, rethinking how we do our required reporting are the things that we can help vendors to be successful. And then finally, how can Ramsey County improve its relationships with new and existing vendors and community agencies? I think we've heard throughout the panel discussion and through the other workshops, again, that open-ended scope where we're saying, here's the goal we're trying to achieve. How can your organization help us get there? That really helped a lot of agencies apply for and be successful and build up their agencies in ways that having a predefined scope would not necessarily help. And then continuing that shift to a relational rather than transactional mode of contracting. And I know that I've heard that a lot of talk about this, and it's kind of in an abstract way without getting into how we operationalize this, but really thinking about how do we change our thinking, our staffing, our support networks to go from, we need to purchase this specific service to, here's a problem we're trying to solve. How can we solve it together? And then working into that solicitation and proposal process and the ongoing work on the back end to help organizations be successful. We do have some recommendations here, and some of these are recommendations that have been in previous work. But developing those video and written materials in multiple languages, providing new vendor orientation sessions and doing the cohort model where applicable, having ongoing check-ins with that cohort throughout the life of the contract, really think through our reporting requirements, what's needed for evaluation, what's needed for federal or state funders or other funders, what do we need for compliance and to understand accountability around contracts, but ensuring that we are getting them what we need, but in the clearest way possible. And those pre-launch engagement that program and departments can be doing around what are the goals? What are we trying to achieve here, and getting community organizations in to shape those. In the long term, thinking about how and under what circumstances advanced payments can be offered, examining the way the county can serve as a connector and a convener and help facilitate those relationships between providers, and then continuing that open scope for proposals where possible and where it makes sense. So the final thing, when reflecting upon this whole report as I was sitting there finalizing the editing and, you know, getting this whole thing together. 3 things really stood out. And when we go back to that initial question, is our residents better off? And yes, they are, and I can confidently state that. On the other hand, there are groups that through the pandemic we need to continue to focus on tech equity and how the pandemic has shaped the way we access services, the way we shop, the way we attend school, the way we work. And those people who don't have access to the technology, who can't utilize those services online that are becoming more and more essential, how do we build up that tech equity? And how do we not accelerate, how do we slow that acceleration or stop those inequalities in who has access to technology? Continue to diversify how the county shares information. And while the trusted messenger and the media messaging and those projects have been considered very successful, they were evaluated from the perspective of a vendor and not their ultimate impact. And so while we need to continue to build on that work, I would be remiss as a researcher if I didn't say we need more evaluation. And this is an area that I think we need to do more understanding of the impact and outcomes of that work, while still valuing the importance of it. And finally, how do we increase and expand community involvement in early planning? And so I think everyone knows we need to do that, it's a priority, but how do you operationalize that? How do you change the work down to the line staff and throughout the organization to really allow for that when sometimes it takes longer? It takes more different compromises, perhaps. Evaluation will be continuing to work with research as it transitions to evaluate their ongoing community engagement efforts and answer questions like, how can shared power be operationalized? Where does community want to be engaged? What do community members need from us to be effective partners? And where is community engagement most appropriate and effective? So those are some of the things we'll have coming up from a research perspective. But I think more needs to be thought about in terms of how do we change how we do our work to be able to be really co-creators. And so with that, that is the end of the CARES workshop series presentations. And I'd be glad to take questions.
Commissioner McDonough.
Thanks, Madam Chair. This was really great. Thank you. Couple things. I want to go back to the EPIQ that we were able to utilize. I think, you know, part of the emergency declaration allowed us some flexibility. And, you know, Ryan and I, you know, we've already talked, right? It was the right thing, get rid of the declaration, get back to, but not lose things that were important to us. And it seems to me we've got to take a look at this moving forward. There's a couple things in there that, you know, I really like. We're attaching, and this is maybe where I need a little bit more feedback from you, and maybe it's different, but that open scope part of it and engaging with community. Sometimes, Deanna, you and your team referenced that open scope, but then you focused in on the goals and worked with community on goals. Other times you talked about how you focused in on the outcomes and allowed community to come in with proposals to achieve outcomes. I think that's really an important piece here. There are two different things there. And so maybe talk a little bit about it. Was there different incidences where it made sense to focus in on the goals versus actually specific outcomes and allow community to tell us how they could help us achieve either the goals or the outcomes? And then how did we measure that? What were the benchmarks so that we had some understanding? Was that a part of this evaluation, or is that, you know, to be determined or more to come on that?
Dana, I think he was asking you.
Well, Madam Chair, Commissioner McDonough, I heard a couple different things in there, and I'll probably call on the panel to give more specifics as well. But engaging community on what the goal should be. Is the goal feeding the community? Is it housing the homeless? What are those? And then there's the second level of what outcome are we trying to do, or what, you know, so what are the goals in the first place? And then once we have a goal, having those open scope proposals or solicitations. So how can we then achieve this goal? how can your organization help us achieve that goal? So I think there's two different levels to that. I think Katrina probably has, to pick on you, Katrina, but with food, some of the early engagement work was really about what should the goals be, that led to these open scope EPIQs that brought in a wider range of vendors and organizations doing a broader range of things than we probably would have seen if we would have said, we're looking for Meals on Wheels to deliver food in the traditional way they've always done it, versus the variety of organizations, including restaurants and other groups that were able to build partnerships to deliver all different kinds of food to different people. So I don't know if you want to add anything there, Katrina.
Sure, I think you captured it well, Dana, and hopefully we're getting to your question, Commissioner McDonough. With the food work, we heard some of the gaps. Some of the goals were to fill gaps. For instance, that people who were homebound during COVID might not have access to fresh, healthy food, and that some of their support networks might all of a sudden be gone and unable to safely get food to them. So then the goal was to feed that part of our community that may not have reliable, safe access to food. And so then we went to providers to say, how do you want to fill this? So what outcome can you get to in terms of filling that need or meeting that goal? And we didn't want to be too prescriptive and how they do it, but say you want to work with communities that are homebound for whatever reason. It may have been that they were physically limited in their ability to leave their homes, and then COVID exacerbated things, or they may have had underlying health conditions or some other reason that leaving their home was not safe during COVID to go get what they needed. So we wanted providers and community groups to tell us how how they saw that they could achieve that goal and reach that outcome.
Madam
I
Chair,
could follow up. Go ahead.
you want on the EPIQ piece specifically, because I'd written this down as one of my standout pieces I was going to highlight anyway. I think to break it away from the term of EPIQ and think about what it matters for, it's the outcome-based, more open solicitation, and the speed at which we moved with vendors we had never worked with are the two things that we need to be thinking about and working on differently moving forward. Now we know who many of those vendors are, so there's no excuse to pretend we don't going forward. And then that open solicitation piece of how do you do that while adhering to the legal requirements so you don't find yourself in a spot where others can challenge your process is what we're working through right now as a long-term learn. And the other part I just want to say, that just because the good news on the long-term pieces that were recommended, the advanced payment piece, we're deep into the development of a new advanced payment policy. I'm sure we'll get to talk about it here in the next 4 to 8 weeks. But we've had a long-standing policy that just doesn't work well, and there's been a group working on that in real time based on a lot of this. And so more to come in that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Katrina, that was actually a great example, kind of the goals, trying to open it up past the traditional maybe Meals on Wheels service line and then the outcomes, what you were trying to achieve. I think, Ryan, I appreciate that. You've got that on your list because I think that's a potential here for us. One thing I think, Dana and our procurement team have really done a really good job, right? They've done a lot over the years of taking us to where we're at, tightening up things, making sure there's equity in the process, making sure that it works. And now it's almost like, okay, now they're ready for the modernization piece that we just heard about this morning, right? How do you actually go from transactional to, relationships and I can't remember the word authentic relationships that are not transactional, right? That's kind of the modernization within procurement that's next, or focusing in on outcomes versus or goals versus actual very prescriptive, this is what traditionally we've looked at. And the only other thing I'll add, and thank you, Madam Chair, listening to the community engagement piece of this, again, we've got work going on in the county, right? Our chief clerk started a lot of work around really taking a look at our traditional community engagement process, right? Part of it was focused in on the appointment process, but a lot of it was focused in on, you know, are these relevant? Are they getting us what we want? And as I'm listening to all this, I'm thinking, whoever who's continuing that work for Janet really needs to have a truly good understanding of what you're doing, because we're gonna continue with an infrastructure of community engagement in a formal way with these community engagement things. We need to build it so that it can work for us, whatever comes at us, right? Instead of having to go back and try to recreate it, let's build it so it's working, just like what you guys were kind of building the plane as you were trying to fly it here, and you did a really good job. But as we're moving and transitioning into the county, and I like your short-term and long-term suggestions here, but really for us to take those and transition them so that we don't always have to build the plane while we're flying, or we're learning within the county when we've got these unique situations. And again, you know, Ryan, I think, where does the evaluation fit in, you know, moving forward within the county here? I think this is such a powerful tool for us, and not just for us, but for the staff that provide the service and for the community that is, you know, looking to us to provide that service. Thank you.
Very good point.
Absolutely.
I have Commissioner McGuire and then Commissioner Carter, unless it was on this.
Well, actually, it ends up being on that, because that's where I was going to start. And so if it's all right with you.
Yeah, but go for it, yeah.
Thank you. I think Commissioner McDonough's point is very, very valid. And as you have, in the process of sharing the information, already identified that what you created, the feedback that you've received and are reporting on today, comes out of that circle of engagement, out of that circle of work that you've done around making it a more relational process for working with our vendors to attend to those community needs and outcomes. You've also pointed to the fact that community engagement, to get closer to the most impacted communities and to understand those outcomes from that screen, is very critical. Commissioner McDonough was just pointing out the changes that we are making overall in community engagement. You've shared the close work that you've been doing with RESERT and the EACs and the hope for transitioning that work. All of this ends up being a part of that very important relational process of community engagement. If we're looking at particular areas such as the food and basic needs, or town halls, as you've pointed out, as a large part of the process, but making certain that that gets closer and closer to the end users or to those most impacted by the services. And that really is about our whole process of community engagement around equity, and making certain that this isn't just a short-term piece, but that we're looking at the long-term transition to how this impacts all of the work that the county is doing. So I just wanted to underscore that it is very important that what you've done during pandemic over such a very short period of time is the critical work and the format or foundation for helping us out of pandemic and beyond. It connects to our budgeting process, it connects to our comprehensive plan, it connects to everything that we do. So applause and kudos, and we are looking forward to the continuing conversation about how we transition this to cover and reflect all of the work we do. Thank you so much for this report and for pointing out already those learnings and the need to make sure they apply across the board and get deeper for us all. And thank you for the time.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, clearly this is impacting all of us in a very similar way. I mean, I'm feeling that the power of your presentation so intimately here. You've all done such a great job of, as we've said, you know, flying the plane, building it, evaluating it, then rebuilding it again, all the while it's in the air. And so you've just done an amazing job of identifying the things that we know we've done well, the things we need to continue to do, and it is crucial to the work that we want to continue to do as a county. So just thank you so much. I always come out of these workshops so energized by the work that you've all done. So thank you for all of that. Just a couple of sort of questions that have been raised, but I'm just going to ask it, you know. So we know that this engagement takes time and resources, and of course, we all have been wanting to do it, and now we're doing it. So as we do this, it'll hopefully get easier, right? Because we'll have the things in place. All these structures that need to happen beforehand, the equity issues that we know we want there, all of these trusted partners that we want to engage in, this will be in place. So as we internalize it more and make it just a part of our everyday work, it'll get a little bit easier, won't it? I mean, it'll get a little bit less expensive, a little bit less time consuming. I mean, so that we really want this to be the work that's embedded in our. Give me some hope that that's the case. Just let me know whether we just want to leave here happy. No, I'm sure it's true. I'm sure that's the case. And so I think it's just good to say it out loud.
I don't know, I've got a few hands up here. Commissioner Hagan wants to be next. And then I'll go to county manager.
Well, let him say it out loud.
Wait, I gotta respond to that, because I don't think it will be.
I know, well, that's what I want to hear it, yeah.
But first of all, I want to say, across the board, including, because I work with these folks so closely, that we have a great staff, and they definitely could carry out almost anything that we put forward. So I just want to echo that, and I certainly echo everything they stated and everything you stated. But this was couched in the beginning with, which I thought was profound. I like the way, that's why I have confidence. They said, the report we're giving you is based on our engagement with community folks that we had access to.
That's right.
There are a lot of people, and that's what they said, that we did not reach. We didn't get their input.
Right.
And so they're moving forward. So I'm not worried about getting the job done, because I think they got a good insight, in terms of how you're proposing it. Now we got the mold, so let's cookie cutter it. There is no such thing. I think they very much couched it in, we got to keep reaching people. We're going to keep getting more ideas. We're going to keep getting better ideas and better connections. And that's, I think, is the positive process to move forward on.
Yeah, just to clarify, I didn't mean to cookie cutter it. I just mean that as we continue to do this, and we will continue to do this, it'll be so much a part of our process that it will be more, it'll be just much more of a habit, I want to say, or, just much more of something that we're doing, so it won't be so unique. But I would love when everyone gets done, I'd love their impression, or their take on what I raised.
County manager?
Madam Chair, Commissioner McGuire, and I appreciate the question. I think in some ways, if we're being brutally honest with ourselves organizationally, when your head's in the same, know where to go, and so it doesn't feel as hard as it probably should, and then you start to pull your head out at certain times, and it in some ways gets easier, and in some ways gets a lot harder. And I think that's the journey we're on for a very, very long time, and I don't know that struggle ever ends for any time in any realistic horizon, but hopefully you're getting deeper and more authentic in how you engage. That's one part. The one part that does get easier, though, and I want to give credit to the board for supporting this through the budget process, because it matters. We're not nickel and diming ourselves every time we want to do community engagement work. And the CARES money has been a great resource to accentuate that, but the dedicated resources, and that did find its way in here, which is a nice finding to see, those resources enable us to stop spending a bunch of time talking about where is the money going to come from to do this. So we cut that out as being the conversation, and instead talk about every 6 months we both are prospectively planning engagement work for projects now, and then we're using remaining resources to respond in the moment. And that is a spot that used to hold us back a lot more than it used to, and no longer is it the excuse or barrier. And so our challenges are different. They're never going to go away, but that was a big change for this organization and in the last budget.
Thank you. I appreciate the way you said it. That does help. That is what I was thinking about it. I clearly know the work could never end, but yeah, thank you.
Well, and I do think that this conversation obviously is a very good one, but, there are different ways that people react to challenge or crisis in organizations. But because I believe that since we had embarked upon the Transforming Systems Together prior to all of this happening, we had a base that others probably didn't have. And so we just ramped it up in a different way. But there are others that, quite frankly, said, okay, let's dig the hole deeper so that we can't see what's going on. And that's not the approach, obviously, that we took. We weren't taking that approach to begin with. But we are, you know, it's transformational. And that will continue to be the case. So will transformation get easier? It's not going to get easier, but I think it will become more maybe comfortable, because you go, okay, we worked on this, we know what the results were, we know what worked, what didn't work, and we can go further. But the issue of access to other folks that need to be part of this conversation, that will get harder, I believe. So, you want?
You know, it will get harder in some ways, but in some ways, I think, you know, the work that they've done on the trusted messenger actually starts making it easier for us to get deeper in the community. That's what will open the doors to get deeper into the community, is all the work that's been done on working and building relationships with trusted messenger. But then, you know, I keep saying this, we've got to position ourselves that we become a trusted messenger, right? That we build. So we're not going to be you know, we're not going to have all the trust in the community by any means, but to have more trust than what we traditionally have to help us get deeper into the community, I think makes that easier.
Commissioner McGuire, and then.
And just to say, I think I didn't use the right word, because I think it's more along the lines of what you said, Jim, and maybe it's just expectations. The community is going to expect that we're going to be doing this, and will hold us to that accountability, and then it will be not a struggle to be always putting it in the budget, always be saying we got to do it. It'll just be the work we do. And so maybe that's what I mean. It's just much more of who we are, and that will be, it won't be any question that we're going to do it. We're just going to do it, and we'll have all these amazing people to help make it happen.
Well, it kind of goes back to our ARP funding discussion. We want Tier 5.
Yeah, right.
It's got to become part of what we do every day. Commissioner Carter.
I just really want to share that I love the thought of that trusted messenger being the county. Certainly, we will hold greater and greater trust as we work with community through trusted messengers and ensure that we always have those relationships. This whole process of going from those transactional to that ongoing relationship, you know, is so important. And it's more than relationship with the vendors. It is certainly relationship with people in our communities. And it, you know, I keep saying it transfers to every process that we do, because this is the residents' first piece. You know, it is acknowledging that the town hall structure of government that disappeared so long ago with, you know, the size and the diversity and the need for our community needs to be met in intricate and difficult ways that then became professionalized, you know, is being reversed at this point in time in Ramsey County, where we recognize it is all about the residents. It is all about those relationships and the knowledge that we gain there, that we are then able to build forward because of the relationships we have in the community. So it's that whole circle, and I'm so thankful for the foundation of work that we did from the time where we did that first "Who Are We" report. Thank you,
Thank
Ryan. To this point in time where we've been prepared for a pandemic through the kind of work that we have with transforming systems together, but then the quick work that we did to transform everything to get us there before we knew we'd get there. And so we still aren't there, but we're well on our way, and thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for the interruption. This is just all so passionate for all of us.
I know.
And to see the work being done in this way is so rewarding and important and foundational for our county. Thanks again.
Okay, who on the panel wants to talk, since we have been just.
Sorry about that.
We just, Madam Chair, Commissioners, we appreciate, I think, all of the comments and kudos. And I'll just say we couldn't do this without community. And community has just been amazing during really challenging times. And so I can't underscore that enough. I just want to lift up what you all have said. And I think this just lends so perfectly to our strategic priority around advancing racial equity and shared community power that, you know, when we, in the question that we oftentimes get, why are we leading with race, right? And I think everything, Commissioner McDonough, Commissioner Ortega, everyone here, you've spoken around and leaned into the fact that we're leading with race for a reason. And we're leaning into that very strongly because of that targeted approach. And I just want to mention that on the research side of things, we were really aiming to take this layered approach, even in the reflection sessions that we would host on top of the evaluation each time. And one thing that we really wanted to get to, but again, time was not always on our side, was really that targeted approach around talking with folks that were actually received services or programming or were impacted by the Trusted Messenger Initiative or the Connector Initiative. And so I just want to mention that that's something that is still on our minds, is still a priority to the work. And that if we're truly going to address and advance racial equity, that those targeted approaches, I think we're getting more targeted, we're getting more focused, we're better understanding the needs of specific communities in a different way. And I think that was lifted up so strongly during the work of food and basic needs and the work around housing and even with research. And so I just want to mention that that's something that has been on at least the research team's mind for some time now, and figuring out how we do that with our partners. And so, but I do want to say that, you know, building trust, as Commissioner McDonough said, for Ramsey County is something that we are doing and something that we hear our partners saying. We hear you, we see you, we're beginning to trust you. You know, we know that we can keep you accountable, and we respect your transparency and your voice in this space. And we truly appreciate the fact that the county is really stepping forward and doing this more and more. And so we do hear those stories. We do hear those messages. We do get approached by community, residents, trusted agencies, you name it. People come up to us all the time and just say that Ramsey County is really leading in this space, and they so appreciate that partnership.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, I also wanted to add in regard to Commissioner McGuire's, like, does this get easier? I think it does, but it's a different way of working. And so what may be uncomfortable and awkward or feel like it takes a long time now. So if you're, you know, working in the old, we'll call it the old school way, you see a need, you know, we go and we send out and say, we want contracts for these specific services. And you get a lot of the same vendors who's maybe always have provided those services. It's quick, it's efficient, it gets, you know, that need met. But I think that initial engagement around what is our goal as a community? What are the kinds of, we see an issue, what do you think? Is it also an issue for you? How can we solve this problem together? While it may take more time on the front end, we'll get a better product and a better service to our residents for taking that time. And so in the end, we'll save time. To Commissioner McDonough's point about how do you measure this? As a contract manager, it's probably fairly efficient to have 5 of the same agencies doing the exact same things and basically managing 5 of the same contracts. Or if you've got 10 contracts and they're all doing different things, it gets a little bit more complicated in terms of accountability and managing those relationships and ensuring that we're measuring, you know, from accountability compliance perspective, what are these agencies doing? But again, I do think in the end, we'll get a better product and we'll have more creativity and a broader array of organizations to partner with in the future. So I think it will get easy as we build it into our new normal.
Yeah, that's a good way. I like the way she said that. Okay, any other comments, questions? This was a great capstone workshop. There was so much information to cover, and I'm glad that it was broken down, quite frankly, into 5, because I don't think we would have gotten the depth of knowledge and not only where we came from, but where we're going and in this transformational process. So, Commissioner Carter.
One final observation and question is that as we look at this relational process that we are building, we are also not doing this work serially. In other words, if we look at food and basic needs and the fact that we have new opportunities to work with new organizations, we're going to be assessing outcomes for food and basic needs, but we also need to be thinking about the economic outcomes that will exist for those who are moving perhaps, and we do see some of this, from being a client, if you will, to being a provider, and so we're going to be tasked, I think, with finding ways of observing multiple outcomes from singular processes differently than we may have done in the past. I won't stay on that, and I'm not saying it very well, but I hope you understand what I'm saying, and I'd love to hear more about that in the future.
Okay, any other comments, any wrap-up?
Madam Chair, I would only conclude with two. It's been a great showcase of many leaders through these processes, and we talk about leadership at all levels. And earlier, there's the part of making sure decision makers are at the table for the various engagements. And the more engagement we do, the more we absolutely need to empower leaders to be a part of those processes, or we're too top heavy and you just can't sustain the work over the long term. And so this has been a good testing ground for that. That's a continued challenge on our end to make sure people feel like in the room they can lead and be able to say, this is the direction we're trying to move. And I'll also work with Elizabeth as her and I meet next time to talk about how to bring together all the recommendations from across the various evaluations in a way where we can summarize what you've heard through the last month and a half, so it's all in one place together forward.
Mm-hmm. Well, and as we go forward and build upon it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. That's what the importance of evaluation, I think, has really shown through here as far as how we can build upon that. And did you have?
Jim can say one more thing, then I will.
And I was gonna leave it at Ryan, but I do want to circle back, because I don't want us to lose things. Because Elizabeth, what you laid out one time for us and really set home with me is, we own things. Sometimes we're the conveners, sometimes we're partners, we got these buckets, right? And as I was looking through and listening to all this, and even listening to Tony's final comments there's some really good examples of where we leveraged our convening power, probably in the food area. That's not an area we typically do, but it was so siloed that we needed a convener there, and we did that, right? And so I just want to lose that connection as we continue to strengthen our roles in these buckets, that's how we continue to strengthen our trust within community too, I think. And so it means a lot to me.
Rachel?
I just echo that, Jim. When you did that presentation, Elizabeth, about what the roles that we play are, I find myself going to that all the time. Okay, what is our role here? Are we a convener? Are we a implementer? What are we doing here? And I do see ways that we're seeing it in our early childhood committee now. They want us to convene that. They don't need us to do it all. They just want us to be the ones pulling that together. So I just appreciate that framework as well. And I wanted to say, of course, thanks to everyone on the screen, but Ryan, I just want to do another public thanks to you. Shout out to your leadership in bringing all these people together to do their good work, not micromanaging, but being there to let the work get done. And you've just been amazing. You are amazing in just having all of this happen for our county. I couldn't be more proud of our county. I think we are the best county in the country. I say it a lot. And I think the rest of the country sees a lot of that. And so just thank you so much for everything you're doing. And we're going to have lots of opportunities to highlight a lot of these things, and I'm looking forward to that. So thanks.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Anything else?
Thank you all.
I think we have come up through this appropriately inspired. So the workshop is, we're done.
Adjourned. That's done. That's what you're saying.
Have a great